one. Like all of our meetings, this meeting is being held remotely using the Zoom platform, and it's also being recorded for posterity and for the public record. So if you don't want your image to be a public record forever, you can turn off your video if you're making a statement before the select board. We're not taking public comments on the policing reports tonight, but if someone else has other public comments, I guess they can present them. So with that, do we have updates? Well, I have an update. Okay, an announcement. Yeah, everyone knows about this horrible situation in Atlanta, and the sort of ongoing attacks on Asian Americans here in America. I mean, it's one group after another: Muslims, immigrants, now Asian Americans, and it's always violent. So I prepared a statement, and I asked the board to look at it,
in Kate's
edit it,
capable hands,
and
to
maybe
get
we can
this
come up with
started.
something that
And
the
if
board
you're
will
still
agree
going
on
after
for a
6:30, I'm
vote
going to pop
on
back
Tuesday,
in
so that
and
we can
take
issue
over.
a formal statement
But
on
if
this
anything
issue.
comes
I
up, I
wanted
have
to
my cell phone
make
on
sure
me,
we
and
said
like I said, I'll be
something,
back in the
in the
meeting
days
at 6:30.
immediately following this incident. And of course, Tuesday we may know more, although I'm not sure what else there is to know about this situation. So my statement is as follows. Thursday morning, March 18, at Brookline High School and Old Lincoln School. So this is just hundreds of people from all over Brookline gathered to show support and solidarity reports for Asian students and the Asian community in Brookline and across America. But might add that I saw Raul there.
I guess
I don't know if other
we've
board
presented a
members
whole
were there.
lot. I'm interested to hear
But
from
the two of us
board members
at
about
least
what
were
questions
there.
they have. Or
The people gathered with great
Okay, so we
sadness,
don't need
having
to
learned of the horrific events that occurred March
Geez, I hope
16
not.
in Atlanta, where a shooter murdered 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian women. Okay, The consequences of this, or the consequence of this act of barbarity, has been the traumatization of people of Asian descent, their non-Asian families, and friends. It comes at a time of increasing reports of anti-Asian racism and violence in our country. Unfortunately, this racism and violence was instigated by the words and deeds
Bernard, I suppose
of
we
the
can update
previous
folks on our
administration
conversation
in
earlier
Washington.
today and
And those words and deeds will
actually,
have
I'll
long-lasting
start with
effects that we
that,
must
and,
continuously be
you
on
can
guard
edit and-
against. I think there's some other areas. Select board speaking for the town of Brookline.
Great.
And again, this is my statement, but hopefully the select board will have something similar.
If
to this
everyone
on
is ready,
Tuesday.
we can count down for B.
Unequivocally, condemns all
3,
forms of
2,
racism, racist
1.
and other violence, and the hatred of women, Bernard Green, that recurrently is a special meeting of the Brookline appears to be a factor in the Atlanta violence. Thursday, hatred is indivisible. 18, and an attack against one segment of our community. Like all of our meetings, this must be seen as an attack using the Zoom platform. And we all must mobilize. It's also being recorded for posterity. The people who are most impacted, public record, and take appropriate steps to fight racist acts, image, and injustice, public record support initiatives to create a safer, video, more inclusive Brookline statement before for all residents, their families. We're not taking public comments on the policing reports tonight, but if someone else has other public comments, I guess they can present. To identify resources and local initiatives that can provide support and comfort to persons subject to the current and future outbreaks of racist attacks against any member of the Brookline community, and the office's continuing collaboration with community groups specifically to provide anti-Asian racism discussions and educational and advocacy programming. So that, as I said, that's my statement. The board, can do with it what it will, and hopefully we'll have something that can be a statement of the entire board on Tuesday. But I wanted to make sure we got something out, very quickly. So with that, are there any other updates or announcements? Raul.
Thanks, Bernard, and appreciated being with you there this morning. And I think that's a great statement. What I would encourage us to do too is to figure out what kind of commitments we can make to redouble our efforts to better engage with our own Asian community in Brookline. We know that the Asian community represents a significant proportion of residents in Brookline, yet are severely underrepresented on boards like ours and the school committee and town meeting. I was excited recently to learn about the appointment of Chi-Chi Wu to the advisory committee, but look forward to a day when we can't just name the folks that are appointed because there are so many. And so perhaps as part of that statement, maybe I'll offer a line or two. We can sort of consider how we as a board can find ways to better engage with the Asian community and encourage greater participation on our boards, committees, and commissions, and encourage folks to run for office too.
Yeah. So thank you. One other thing I'd like to, I didn't have time to check this out, but one other thing I'd like to think about is when events like this happen, the school mobilizes their counselors and I think outside psychologists and others to provide counseling to their students. I wonder if we're doing enough to provide that type of counseling throughout the community. I mean, I don't know, but that's one thing maybe we just look at. Is there something else we can do when events like this happen? And unfortunately, they will continue to happen, just like mass shootings in schools across the country or other places. So that's one thing I would like to look at. Heather?
Might be a good opportunity to get Ian Lang from the Brookline Mental Health Center to speak to us maybe next week or the week after about efforts that they're doing and things that they're seeing.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? John?
Yeah, along with this topic, I'd like to thank Raul for mentioning Chi-Chi Wu for her leadership in this, and I think we should recognize that there's extraordinary leadership in the Brookline community. There's the Brookline Asian American Family Network that is a very important contributor to the community. Chris Chanya-Sulkut, who's a town meeting member from Precinct 13. I don't want to leave anyone out, so I'll leave it at that. But we have an opportunity here, and I welcome the statement that the chair offered, and I look forward to the select board joining unanimously in support of a statement at next Tuesday's meeting.
Could I just point out one other thing about the schools?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this year, because of the pandemic, we could not have our normal China exchange program. But every year we do, for the past almost 21 years, we have had a China exchange program. 8 students come from China in the fall semester, and we send 8 students to Gaoxian School in Xi'an. And that has gone very, very well. And I think that kind of program also helps our students understand one another's cultures, understand each other. And I hope that that kind of program also reduces the kind of anti-Asian feelings that students may have, because they actually, and they also, of course, there are many of their classmates are of Asian descent. And I really think that kind of thing is so valuable in helping kids grow up with a diverse group of people whom they can respect.
Yeah. Hey, let me add one thing, and maybe the statement needs to reflect this. Asia is a huge continent, and we sometimes sort of mix up East Asian and South Asian communities. I think the hatred that we're seeing today is really indivisible with respect to Asia, as it is indivisible generally. But we should always be just aware of the fact that even in East Asia, the differences between countries and cultures is incredibly significant. So let's just be careful about making sure that we're not lumping everyone into one basket. Now, of course, the haters lump everyone together, but that's what we're fighting. So, okay, yeah.
Thanks, Brian. If I can mention just one other thing, the board already knows this because we discussed it prior to or I mentioned it prior to the end of our meeting on Tuesday night. But for those that were concerned about the inclusion of the Council on Aging in particular, but as well as the CDS, Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Community Relations, and Veterans Services as part of the Brookline Forward proposal, that has been removed. So anyone that hasn't got that message, I did my best to write to everyone that spoke about that on Tuesday night directly and inform them of that. And I've heard back from positive feedback from a number of people. But for anyone that hasn't gotten that message or that hasn't reached you, please know that that is no longer part of the proposal. What I hope we can do is continue to support all of those offices. As folks that are regular watchers of these meetings know, I talk a lot about social services and the need to enhance services for all those groups. So I'll continue doing that, and we'll continue finding ways to support them. And hopefully, should the proposal pass, to sort of have them partner with this new agency and find ways to work together. So just wanted to offer that and make sure everyone's aware of that. Thanks.
Okay. Let's see. We have on the calendar or on the agenda public comment, but I guess we have to have a public comment session, but not on the policing reports, because that's going to be discussed on the agenda. So, Heather, you want to take over?
Sure. As Bernard stated, we would rather not hear from the members of the public about the policing reports because that is the subject of our meeting tonight. And we have had lots of public comment on Tuesday and in a couple of the meetings preceding this. If you have comments, you can feel free to email us, but I'll go into my usual spiel. Thank you for joining us for public comment. We are all volunteer elected officials who serve out of a sense of duty to this community, and we do our best to represent as many different points of view that are in this community as possible. We have a few rules I'd like to share. Each person speaking is limited to 3 minutes. Please refrain from personal attacks or from addressing personnel issues during this period. You are welcome to send the board members an email expressing your thoughts in more detail. If a speaker has reached the 3-minute limit or violates other expectations, I will ask the other board members if there are any objections before instructing Kate to mute the speaker. Let's begin.
Vice Chair Hamilton, at this time, we have not had anybody sign up for public comment. And nobody is indicating that they would like to speak. At this time, there are 19 attendees.
I really appreciate that everybody's abiding by our soft rule.
Okay.
We have one hand up.
Okay.
Michael Keaveney.
And I take it this is not about the police reform or task force recommendations?
I think he just put his hand back down.
You have our email addresses. Well, if there is no one else, maybe we should go into our deliberations.
Okay, deliberations. Okay, well, let me start off by saying, and Raul may want to add something to this, that he and I and Michael Zurab of our committee, the Reform Committee, unfortunately, Eitan Hirsch could not meet, but we talked about what things there is an alignment between the two committees on, and we focused on the Police Commissioner Advisory Committee. And, don't mean to speak for Raul, but I think there was a general agreement that this was a good proposal, subject to a couple issues that we still haven't resolved, but they're not major issues. And we'll sort of discuss that at some point, probably tonight. The board will just have to take a vote on them. So I think there are other areas where there's agreement. We just have to figure out how to formulate that agreement. I think in terms of areas where we can shift some of the responsibilities now being carried by the police department to non-police areas would be an area where we have agreement. And frankly, we have agreement with the police department, or at least the police officers who filled out the survey that our committee did. So, those should be no-brainers, and we just have to identify them and figure out, how to actually do it. But anyway, do you have anything to add, Raul?
No, not much. I think we can take a look at it. And, I think there are still a couple points where of disagreement, as you mentioned. And I'll just say what I said last time we met on Tuesday is that I think it's, very good, but not perfect. And I appreciate the work that the Reform Committee did on this. I think of all the work that was done there, this is some of, I think, the most polished and the most thoughtful, and really aims to address some of the issues that board members know that we reckon with, which is our ability to provide what the public expects, which is more day-to-day oversight of the police department that frankly we don't have the bandwidth to necessarily do. So this helps us in that regard, and we can sort of talk through it and see. Again, I'm very curious. I mean, you and I have had a chance to look at it, but I'm very curious to see if other board members have thoughts or edits or suggestions or anything like that.
Yeah. Let me just, Raul just praised my committee. So I'll return the favor and praise the work of the task force. And let me just, and I don't mean that sort of jokingly, but let me just note that we did incorporate significant, a lot of things from the task force's deliberations. And I can think of the Police Commissioners Advisory Committee for one, because I think Etan Hirsch put out a draft that I incorporated stuff, from in preparing our PCAC. The other area, quite ironically, is the areas of school resource officers and walk and talk officers. You may notice in our report that we took some of the critiques from the task force subcommittees with respect to MOUs and reaching out to various parties that wasn't done when these organizations were put together. And we've incorporated that into our requirement for going forward. So I know that, our committee thinks that the two units should continue, and the task force thinks they should be terminated. But even still, there was areas of agreement, at least one way anyway. So okay, the floor is open for questions from the select board. Discussion. So maybe I'll start off. I'm sorry, John.
I guess I have a couple of procedural questions first. Is tonight's meeting intended to, go on as long as we need to, thoroughly air a lot of questions and concerns, or is it just kind of a touch base and, each person on the board say one or two things and then we're done? I wasn't sure coming into this meeting, how in depth do we intend to get in this meeting?
Well, as in depth as we want, but we do have a hard stop at about probably 7:45. We set that hard stop so that everyone could participate in Tommy Vitolo's event.
He'll be glad to hear that.
Yeah. So.
And I don't intend to filibuster in case I'm making anybody nervous. All right, well, let me see if I can just tick off a few of the things that have been on my mind as we go forward. The first thing I'm going to say is that I'm going to repeat the back and forth praise from Bernard to Raul and Raul to Bernard for the work of their groups. And it cannot be said enough that this process, some might say got off to a rocky start, took us a little while to kind of come together, decide we wanted to go in, with two different groups doing work sort of from two different directions. But that eventually got going, and I've been one of these people that's been kind of hovering and in the background and watching these groups as they meet. And I've been amazed at the consistency of the effort of virtually every member of each of the two groups, meeting after meeting, subcommittee meeting after subcommittee meeting. I hope people in Brookline recognize these two processes attracted individuals who were truly committed and stuck with it every step of the way, talked, listened, worked hard, did research, and both reports reflect that, and both reports, deserve full consideration by everyone in Brookline. That being said, I heard a couple of suggestions during the public comment, public feedback session on Tuesday that really rang true to me, or at least indicated a positive forward direction that I thought we should seriously consider taking. And one was town meeting member Scott Gladstone. He knows that I think he had a great idea, and I called him the next day to say so. We had a nice conversation about it. Who floated the notion of a conference committee. He compared this to, okay, so now we've got these two reports. They don't always agree on everything. We could go in one direction with one report, other direction with the other report, but why not do what they do in Congress, which is, when the House and the Senate have two different versions of a bill, they form a conference committee, and then the conference committee works out a compromise bill, and then the compromise bill gets sort of put to a vote. So I think we should think seriously about that. A different version of that suggestion, which I like just as much, came from someone, forgive me that I don't have her name handy, but she was from United Parish in Brookline, and she cited the example of a married couple who happened to have gone to separate ways in terms of their service on the committees. Ron Wilkinson served on Chair Green's committee, and Almastosa served on Raul Fernandez's committee, task force. And this person said, if within a marriage there can be two people taking different approaches to these problems, and those two people can, come home at night and talk to each other and discuss their differences, and the marriage stays strong, and they might be setting an example for the rest of us. So one example is the conference committee. The other example is a marriage. Can we do a marriage of these two groups, the Reform Committee and the Reimagining Task Force? And what started out as, separating them, will end with kind of bringing them back together so that there can be mutuality of effort here. And we can actually set an example of how to reach consensus by having these two groups talk to each other in some form. That's an awful lot of people. So I don't mean that you have to have every member of each of the two groups, but if there could be some sort of sub, grouping that reflects both groups, that comes together to dialogue with one another and then to come to a consensus, I think that would be wonderful. So I'd be happy to share a few other thoughts later, but I've talked much too long already, and I'll step back, and maybe others want to add some thoughts too.
Nancy.
All right, I'll take a crack at my initial impressions of the other night. I agree with John that Scott made a very good argument for a conference committee and a compromise, and I can see the issue of marriage also coming to the fore there. But I think that there are some things that we need to acknowledge, at least I need to acknowledge as a select board member. And that is that I was very pleased that Raul understood the significant criticisms to merging both veterans and senior services. in this new department. I think that we have a very strong senior senior director in Ruth Ann Dobek, a disabled person, by the way. And we have a very strong director of veteran services in Bill McGordy. And I don't feel that I think that they are functioning at a very optimal level. And I don't think we should impose any supervision on them in the way that this former organization chart seemed to. And so I'm glad that that issue seems settled. I would also say that for me, there was a very important message, and one we didn't hear really from anyone else the other night, and that was from Bill Schechter. Bill is a retired high school history teacher in social studies from, I believe he was working in Lexington, although he's always lived in Brookline. He made a very interesting point about the police department and the fact that if you don't have community police, in essence, what he said, I'm not going to quote him exactly because unfortunately, I didn't write it down. I haven't had time to review the tape, but basically he said that if you don't have some element of community policing in the Brookline Police Department, you lose something, and what you lose is in my words, you lose the guardian model and revert to more of a warrior model. They only respond when they need a gun. And he phrased it in terms of autocracy, and that he believes that it's more likely that kind of police force could be corrupted by an autocrat. And I think that's what he was saying. I've always felt that having the police be involved in the community in ways other than traditional, I'll call it, policing was very, very important for not only the police, but also for our citizens and for our kids. It's great that people in this community can be friendly with the police, and I understand that there are some tensions with police officers by some, and we need to work on that, but that doesn't mean we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that for me, I feel it's very important to have community policing as part of our police program.
Heather, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I'm still trying to formulate where to even kind of begin. Maybe I'll begin with just building off of what Nancy was saying. I've gone back and forth about how I feel about a number of the recommendations, and the walk and talk program and the school resource officers. I guess I remember when school resource officers were really introduced. I was a freshman in high school when Columbine happened, and I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened. And I still remember one of my classmates coming into my English class the morning of 9/11, and the look on her face, I was prepared for an active shooter scenario. Like that was a real tangible fear that I think a lot of people had for a very long time. I'm sure people still do. But I couldn't tell you the name of the school resource officer that got introduced into my high school. I don't know any of my friends that really utilized her, though she was there every single day. Maybe some people did. So I could be persuaded that it's no longer necessary if I don't hear compelling information as to what it really brings to the table versus what I'm hearing causes some people stress. The walk and talk program, I understand that it may have helped solve a murder. And I think that that is very impressive. And that is a testament to the fact that Brookline is a town. We're still a town. We're not a city, and relationships really do matter. But I don't really love the idea of telling a community, no, this is for your best interest. One of the things that really struck me when I moved to Brookline was when I was walking through Coolidge Corner at rush hour and the police officers were directing traffic, in the crosswalks. There are other ways to integrate our police officers into the community that don't target people as to where they live. So I'll just say that. I would be very interested to zero in on the two sections of the task force's recommendations, departmental analysis and the recommendations on, I think, community engagement as well. I think I've heard that there's a lot of overlap or agreement about civilian oversight, the need for that. I want to understand more about this child-centric model and the Cahoots program. I like what I'm hearing, but I'm a little concerned that we're not fully accounting for all the costs. And I'll just end there.
Let me just add, Casey Hatchett asked me to circulate a email that she wrote regarding the SRO program and the situation at the high school that involved both the SRO program and the walk and talk unit, that I think she characterized it as keeping a kid out of jail. So I just throw that out, because there are a number of reasons other than, solving crimes that are a number of examples other than solving that crime where, the walk and talk program, the SRO played a key role in, avoiding what, has been characterized as a school to prison pipeline. And I'd also add that, we need to also, and frankly, our committee nor the task force has done this. And it's because there's just so much to do. But in addition to asking or looking for the views of one side of the issue, youth, for example, we should ask their parents, because the parents many times have a different view of, in this case, the SROs and walk and talks. I'm not saying that I know what the parents would say, but that's something that we sometimes forget about. I know that when I was a kid, I had a different view of the police, and of course I lived in a unique place, but different view of the police than my mother did, and it was based on her fears, not of the police, but of the rough world out there. So I don't know. I just think those are two other issues that we need to factor in.
I wanted to talk for a minute about, because I thought about this the other night when we were hearing these comments about the guardian versus warrior mentality or approach, and I think that I mean, at least my understanding of it isn't that in order to have this approach, the police department needs to engage in social services. That within, again, and when we talked about returning police to their core function, we said enforcement of the law. We didn't say necessarily just fighting crime, right? But beyond just crime fighting, enforcement of the law. So it's still a pretty broad scope of duties that is there. And there are ways that that police officers within that scope of duty can act more like guardians than warriors. If for instance we were to continue with traffic enforcement and addressing some of the issues that police get called to address, how we address those issues is is I think central to improving policing. But I am not at all convinced that that having some officers in schools and others in public housing somehow makes the rest of the department better or at engaging with people. I don't know that that connection's been made at all. It might be that those officers are better at it, and maybe they're selected because they are better at that kind of work. And what I would say is we need those kinds of officers doing the other kinds of work that are central to their function as police, not social service work. So I keep going back to, if we were to start today and we say we have X amount of money that's going to address the kinds of issues that we see being addressed in BHA and at the schools, how should we spend those monies? For the most part, I don't think it would even occur to anyone to say we should spend them on police. Certainly, I'd be curious to hear what the 9 school committee members have to say about that. And I know that the 5 BHA commissioners have started taking up, they just had one meeting. They're going to continue to meet about this again, the walk and talk program. But I'd be surprised if anyone said this is how we should spend those monies. And I think the reason those programs exist in those spaces is because we're the ones paying for it. BHA was paying 15 grand, which we all know is, well, we all agree is not a good idea that they were paying that money, but we all know is nowhere near the cost of operating that program. And the schools are not paying $1 through their budget for the officers. And so, I think we have to consider that too. The reason that this has been so easy for the schools to adopt or BHA to adopt is because they didn't have to foot the bill for it. I think this is about trade-offs and that there's a better trade-off to be made here. And so I'll just keep coming back to that. And I would like to talk more, not necessarily tonight or at some point in the future, about how we get those officers that are not in the community service department to better adopt the guardian mentality rather than the warrior one, to the extent that they haven't already.
Okay, I don't think you should assume they haven't.
I added the caveat at the end, Bernard.
Yeah, I got it.
They haven't already, yeah.
Got it. For 3 decades, this he used to be called Board of Selectmen, and the town has really been pressing the police department to become guardian oriented. With Chief O'Leary, that really began to take off, and the entire department. The attempt was made, and I think they were successful. The entire department was targeted with, here's how you do policing in a way that is sort of in the guardian mold, in terms of training, in terms of addressing the issue of vehicle stops and disparate treatment of Black and brown people. First, department in the state, if not in the nation, to actually monitor stops so that those disparities could be addressed. In terms of the community policing ethos, and the walk and talk program is just sort of an offshoot of that. I think 30 years effort by this town to create a police department that reflects our values. We really can't discount what we did to create this police department. We did that. We were successful. We ought to acknowledge that success, fix the things that still need fixing, but recognize that we created something that's maybe unique in. I'm sure it's not unique in the country, but is still a very unique institution that is way more responsive, way more progressive, way more responsive to our demands. I'm thinking, for example, of the immigration matters that we pushed a couple years ago. They are very responsive to doing what we wanted in terms of resisting the federal encroachment on town prerogatives and other things. So, you can't just assume that the only people who have this community guardian mentality are the ones who are in the walk and talk program. I mean, that in my view, in my understanding, for 30 years, that has been built throughout the department. And I think that appears, I mean, we saw it in our work, and I'm sure it was also seen in the work of the task force to some degree.
Yeah, that's fine. That wasn't my presumption at all. But I do think, when what folks are talking about the task force report and the sort of reprioritization of social services over policing in these two spaces that we're talking about, that is where the guardian versus warrior comment came up. It didn't come up when we were talking about, I don't know, traffic enforcement or something else. And so so that was my response to that comment, or those comments that I've heard. So I just think I think an essential question for us is on that front is whether or not we think that as Mariah Nebrega mentioned in her letter, is this the highest and best use of those funds for the schools, and is it the highest and best use of those funds for the housing authority? I think there's no question in my mind that those programs are necessary. I know they're not necessary because not all municipalities have them, but frankly, almost no other municipality has something like the walk and talk program, although there are officers in public housing around the country. But these programs are not legally required, so they're not necessary in that way. And if they were to go away, we also would still have the ability for schools to liaise with the police, for the public housing authority, for the Brookline Housing Authority to liaise with the police, to have police come in and address certain things like cybersecurity, which is one of the things that they address with kids. That none of that would go away. And frankly, I'd like to see more of the leadership of the police department involved in those relationships and more deeply involved in those relationships. So I say again, is that the highest and best use of the funds that we have needed to address the social service needs of, in this case, in the case of the housing authority, low-income people and people of color, and especially in the case of the schools, youth and anyway, and their families. I'm not convinced that that's the highest and best use of those funds in those ways, but.
Well, the funds that can be spent one way or another with respect to the housing authority. It's just, this is a way of spending the funds that helps people way more than just calling in the cop who happens to be around when there's an incident or a need for police involvement.
Yeah.
And the police aren't going away if the walk and talk program goes away. You're just going to have, I don't want to say worse police, but police who are less attuned to the issues in the community, that particular community, less knowledgeable of the people. And I think, you have to say, although I really hate having to say this, less empathetic to the struggles that people go through. Just like anyone who doesn't live in a community is going to be less knowledgeable and empathetic to some of the struggles that people may have. And by the way, it's not just the housing authority facilities where we have cops who try to get to know people. It's probably just more intense there. But yeah,
I guess I'll just say about on that is I think it's just a really paternalistic sentiment to say that these folks need this service and no one's really been able to articulate particularly why they do. Is it, why their relationships needed to be built with low-income people more than others from the police department. What we've heard is that crime is no higher in public housing than it is outside of public housing in Brookline. Maybe
due to the walk and talk?
Is it because of the walk? No, it's the same as the rest of the community. I don't know. The idea is that crime would be rampant in public housing were it not for these three officers.
Nobody's saying it would be rampant.
I don't think anyone's saying that. No, I understand. I don't think anyone's saying that either.
That's an exaggeration.
Right. Well, thank you. I agree. I'm not sure what folks are saying then. Maybe I'll just allow folks to say what they want to say about this, but I think it's extremely, by the way, we've heard from, the other key question for us, I think, is this: how many folks that have an issue with this program do we need to hear from before we agree that there are enough folks that have an issue with this program? Certainly one of the members of our committee, our task force, who lives in public housing, has an issue. We heard at the BHA commissioners meeting from 3 men of color who live in public housing who have an issue.
No, actually, they don't live in public housing. They live in what's it called, Village Way, which is not public housing, and the walk and talk officers don't do anything there.
Fair enough.
I mean, they're affordable housing, but they're not public housing.
Right. And others as well, right? And so they're captured in the task force report. So, I think we are operating, and I'm not clear on why we're doing this, frankly. We're starting from a position of this thing needs to exist unless proven otherwise, and I'm not sure why we're doing that. I'm not sure why we're not, as folks have recommended, land the plane. Let's now figure out, if you think there's not enough data, then let's figure it out and decide whether it needs to take off again. But frankly, this idea that, I don't know, we just haven't heard from enough people that it's a bad idea, even though we've presented some evidence that people do think it's a bad idea, or something else. But again, it's this: someone give me a reason. Someone give me a good reason why we have this program in public housing and nowhere else. And why those people, what is the characteristic of those people that requires 3 officers to build relationships with them where no one else is required to do that? No one's made that, no one's told it.
We have a community of people who are low income, many of them under great stress. And this is an effort by our town to provide extra services to them so that some of that stress could be reduced. I mean, and it's part and parcel of the Steps to Success program and all the other programs that go on in public housing. It's the community stepping up for a community that could be under stress or is under stress, to ensure that that stress is not out of control or whatever, or is more harmful than necessary needed. Heather?
I kind of don't want to keep going back and forth on this, and I think
Okay.
that we will. But I will say this: I understand that the housing authority commissioners want to deal with this issue, want to hear from residents and whatnot. I would be very interested in hearing the results of that process. I don't know how long that will take, so I would really appreciate if the Brookline Housing Authority can follow up with us and at least commit to some deadline. But I would be very open to hearing their thoughts, since it's their residents who are the most affected.
Right. Actually, you raise a good point. Maybe these are not issues that this board should be work with. And the 2 committees gave our recommendations, the data that we've collected, and it's really up to the school committee and the commissioners of the housing authority to make this decision.
I tend to agree with Raul that it seems a little paternalistic, and I like the right to self-determination. I think most people do. So I think that those 2 bodies ought to weigh in.
John?
Yeah, I wanted to say somewhat the same thing that Heather said, but I'll add a couple of comments to that. So I was at the Housing Authority meeting where they did bring this up for discussion. And it was very interesting that there are a lot of opinionated people who think one way or the other that that people who live in housing in the Housing Authority developments either don't want to have the police around or do want to have the police around. What was fascinating about this meeting, and this was the Brookline Housing Authority, you know, the regular monthly meeting of the commissioners of the Housing Authority. I said this at the end of my part of the meeting. We've heard from so many people tonight, but we haven't heard from Housing Authority tenants. And I don't, in any sense, fault my colleague Raul Fernandez for making the same assumption that I think a couple of people made. Yes, three individuals spoke with great authority about what is the right thing for Housing Authority tenants. One would have thought that they were Housing Authority tenants, but they weren't. And as it turns out, almost no one who was a Housing Authority tenant, maybe no one, spoke at that meeting. So eventually the Housing Authority commissioners, some of whom are well acquainted with this program historically as well as in the present, spoke. And it turns out that they themselves, share different opinions and different views and are, thinking through, do we still need this program? What purpose did it originally serve? Does it still serve that purpose? So they have this very seriously under consideration. And by no means do I think we should decide this for them. I think that eventually, and I think sooner rather than later, they're going to come to their own decision. I hope they do it with a lot of input from the tenants themselves. They're going to come to their own decision as to whether it would be a good thing for the tenants of the Housing Authority housing to have the walk and talk program. So here's what concerns me. Let's say that they come to the conclusion that indeed there's a degree to which this is unwelcome, that requires that they terminate the program as it is, in terms of the relationship of the police department to the Housing Authority. What then replaces it? Because I think the question that this begs is, don't we need some kind of regular contact between the Brookline police and whether it be members of the citizens, excuse me, I'm getting all tangled up in my words, residents of the Brookline Housing Authority housing, residents of Precinct 15, residents of kids at the high school. Do we want to separate from the police department so that we have no more relationships other than the relationship of the respondent to an emergency situation, to a 911 call? Don't we want to find some other alternative to walk and talk that cultivates relationships of trust between the police and community members? And I think we do. And interestingly enough, we've been doing our process. Newton has been doing its process. And I strongly advise, as if people didn't have enough to do reading the two Brookline reports, I strongly advise they read the Newton report. It's very thoughtful, just like ours are thoughtful. Comes to somewhat different conclusions. Comes to the general conclusion that more needs to be done to cultivate the guardian role of the Newton police. I think the guardian role is what this is all about. So I think the Housing Authority has to decide for the Housing Authority what is best. I think the school department has to decide for the schools what is best. If those decisions lead to phasing out of these two programs, I want to know, what are we going to replace these two programs with? What will be the next means of connection that isn't just response to emergency or response to crime? What will be the next means of connection between the police department and the community?
And I fear, in terms of Housing Authority, that it's just whoever happens to be around in the sector, or even worse, private security. And police aren't going away, so from public housing or anywhere else. So that is a legitimate question. Do you have your hand up, Heather?
Well,
Or Nancy? I'm sorry,
Na-
there's
Nancy has her hand up, but I can't resist. I mean, you know, if something goes down in my apartment, I'm stuck with whoever is in the sector.
okay,
It's not a bad thing.
wow. Nancy,
I just want to,
but good point, by the way. I agree with that.
I just want to go back to the issue of officers in schools. And as you know, I was on the school committee in the 90s. And sometimes we had a kid who was troubled and who was headed for that prison pipeline, which we all detest. And I remember that Bob Weintraub and Chief O'Leary used to meet, you know, maybe once a week for lunch to talk about how the police could be more helpful in diverting kids and keeping them out of that pipeline. If it wasn't very many, but if it was one kid, it's worth saving. You know, well, that one kid from the prison system, and so I think maybe I wasn't around when the SROs were officially designated in that way. So I don't know whether that designation came out of what they were trying to do in terms of making sure that no kid got into that prison pipeline and that there were services for that kid, not necessarily by the police, but and that the police would work with the family to, you know, figure out where they could go for whatever, and social workers from the school. I mean, it was a collaborative effort, and so, you know, we've had police in and around the school anyway for quite some time. I know that there sometimes were police officers there at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day. Sometimes kids were frustrated and would start to fight with each other. And, you know, this was a help to have a police officer there so that it didn't get out of hand and that teachers were not required to intervene because sometimes that had happened in the past and a teacher got injured. So we don't want that. And you don't know when tempers will flare. This has been a very stressful year. And so I don't say that they flare that much now because kids aren't in school, but when they come back, you know, and I don't know how the school administration will handle it, but I'm telling you that I think that there was a role for the police. We kept kids out of that prison pipeline. And I can remember years and years ago, when I was an attorney and I was practicing in the area of chins, which was, I don't know if they still have that designation now, juvenile court, but it was children in need of services. And it was shocking that some kids just really didn't get the services they needed. And in Brookline, I know at least one or more cases where the police were very, very helpful in getting the kid to and the parents to want to have services to protect the kid from the from the prison pipeline. So, you know, I do think that the police have developed some skills in that area, and I would hate to lose that. I really would. I think it was an important effort, and police can talk about prisons in a way that I think, and talk about it with kids in a way that I think that other people may not be able to because they haven't experienced it as much. So anyway, I think we do have to leave it up to the schools, and we have to leave it up to the housing authority as to what is best. But I hope that there would be ongoing cooperation. And I know that that's happened at the schools. I don't know as much about the housing authority and how it's been handled there. But again, you know, the police are there for services and for certain goals. And for now we have the bicycle police, which makes the police officers who ride around neighborhoods and seek to provide. We got this established when some years ago, I believe, but I think it's been very valuable in terms of the cannabis mitigation and keeping down the source of difficulties for neighbors. And again, that's a form of community policing, and they're not there to slap a ticket on somebody or throw them in jail. They're there to educate people. You know, we do have reasons and bylaws for not smoking in public, and here they are. And this is what we hope you will adhere to, etc. And I think that role is very important. We don't want to slap people into, you know, with tickets or prison or whatever, but we want to ask them to observe our rules. And I don't think our rules are in any way unfortunate or, you know, overbearing or please put your trash in the trash can, you know. So.
Oh, someone asked the question of what would we replace the I think is SRO officers with if they weren't there? I mean, it used to be that I think Nancy said that Chief O'Leary would go and speak with Dr. Weintraub, occasionally talk about issues that come up. And, you know, that's great. I wonder if you know, you could set up similar relationships on issues that you know, I think are probably pretty significant at the high school that police have a unique way of addressing, and things like cyberbullying, things like targeting of kids by predators of one sort or another, things like dating violence, you know, things, you know, where you know, having an officer in the school could, I don't know, maybe a social worker could do this, but of course the question to ask is whether the social workers in the school want to take on these functions. But you know, being someone that someone could bring a sensitive issue to that involves police, for example, someone with a weapon in the school, not mass shooting type situation, but just someone who brings a knife to school, brings a gun to school, unfortunately, or you know, threats that may be out there. Now, yeah, maybe teachers, maybe social workers can do that. I'm not sure that they're willing, but I don't know. That's up to the school committee to analyze and make a decision on.
I'll just say one thing, and then maybe we can move on. The schools found a way to do this for over 100 years, and without police in the schools, and to address those issues. And crime ain't new, and violence in schools ain't new, and not much of this is new. What I will say is that I've heard a sense from the board that you all want to have the school committee take this issue up around the school resource officers, and the BHA commissioners continue to take this issue up around the walk and talk unit. So I don't know if it makes sense to keep going around here when they're still the school committee hasn't started that work, and the BHA commissioners are continuing it. So
Yeah, no, I think that's
discuss.
And I would hope that those two bodies would speak to the officers who are in walk and talk, or the school resource officers, or the chief, you know, people who know about what the history of the program, what it's provided. And, you know, once they have all the information, they may decide, well, that's not the best model. We could use a different model. I think anyone who looked at it would say, yes, we want to make sure that in the case of the schools, that we have some sort of program to make sure that kids aren't destined for prison, and that we can, what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen. You know, I think that's really an important role. I will say also, just in terms of, you know, what Bernard commented about whether social workers would want to do that. In my in my legal career before, in my early legal career, I was a regional counsel at Department of Social Services. And we had, a lot of social workers on staff. And, but if they could in any way tell that the offender, the person who was the abuser, was violent towards others, or they wouldn't want to go without a police officer. And police officers needed to have the training to be able to work in that situation as well. So I think, there's also that consideration, and I think that applies to domestic abuse as well. So I think we have to recognize that social workers, while they're great, and they, I have a social work degree myself, and I'm very, I have a lot of admiration for social workers who I think do great work. But in this situation where they could be exposed to violence, I think they're scared, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to go into that kind of situation. Domestic violence is a particular one, because the person who's committing the violence is very angry. Often they're using a weapon and turn around and use it on the person who's trying to intervene or help, and it gets out of hand. So.
Excuse me, I do agree that there's sort of a consensus that this is going to be decided by the Housing Authority and the school committee, and that's the way it should be. It's just that there's one point that hasn't been made, and if people will forgive me, I just want to add this point to the conversation. I've been a little concerned all along about the dichotomy that is posed of, well, of course, there's the police, who is the law enforcement person, and then there's the social worker, who is the empathetic and caring and understands how to, deal with emotional issues and needs. As though that's the only two choices here. And the one choice that I actually think comes closest to describing the walk and talk model, and I think perhaps the SRO model as well, if it's done right, it's not, the police as social worker, which maybe some might argue they're not really trained or cut out to be social workers. If you want a social worker, get a social worker. If you want a cop, get a cop. Well, what about the police officer as friend? And maybe that sounds kind of corny, but when I heard during the meetings of the two groups descriptions of what actually is done by, in particular, the walk and talk officers, I heard things like, like they drove some kids to their graduation who didn't have, their families didn't have cars, and during COVID, they did this drive-by graduation. So they offered to drive kids to their graduation. What else did they do? Well, sometimes they deliver pies to the families in the housing authority at the holidays. Well, what else do they do? Well, they go to the basketball games and cheer on, the Brookline team. To me, that sounds like officers who see value in offering to be mentors and friends to kids at a vulnerable age. And it doesn't matter whether you're from the housing authority or from anywhere else in Brookline, teenagers tend to be at a vulnerable age, and some of them get bullied, and some of them need a friend that makes them feel safe. And I do think that in many instances, that's the role the police are trying their best to serve. So I hope as the discussions of this go forward, people won't isolate it as being, well, we have to choose between the law enforcement cop or the empathetic social worker, but we'll recognize that there is a role to play for the neighborhood cop, if you'll put it that way, the local cop, the well-known cop, the cop who's been there year in and year out, and who is in a role of trusted friend to kids who need an adult friend as well as friends of their own age.
Yeah, just very quickly, and again, I hope we can move on to other topics. just say, and I know that this doesn't, won't change the larger point for folks, but just there's a statement made about no members of who live in public housing speaking at that meeting. Kimberly Richardson, in fact, did speak at that meeting, and there is some question about whether or not the walk and talk unit actually ends up patrolling Village Way or not, but I'm not going to get into that. Just because things sometimes end up online after our meetings and people say things, I just want to make sure the record's as clear as possible.
And I want to apologize to Kimberly for not remembering that she spoke, but of course the context was we were talking about the three adult males who spoke, but anyway.
Yeah. I don't think there's any question that walk and talk doesn't go into Village Way.
What else?
Does anyone have anything to say?
So I thought that the main consensus point was about civilian oversight. So can we talk about that?
Sure. So I guess I can start off by saying that the Reform Committee is proposing what's called Police Commissioners Advisory Committee, and that name came from Marty Rosenthal, who is obsessed with the idea that the select board are police commissioners. And he's right. I'm not saying that in a negative way. And he's been working on this issue for decades. But we are police commissioners, and what does that mean? Well, it means we have some authority over the police department, and we have some role to play when there are complaints made against police officers. And there haven't been a lot of complaints, there haven't been a lot of appeals to the select board. But the concern is that we don't really have the means or maybe the inclination to do all that we can do to intervene in situations where there are complaints against police officers. And a committee like this would be one way to assist us and provide and facilitate the select board acting as the police commissioners or civilian oversight of the police that we are by law required to do. So we put together this proposed standing committee that would do a number of things, everything from constantly reviewing and making recommendations to the select board with respect to police department policies, procedures, practices, et cetera, and would also serve to assist civilians in presenting complaints to the police department. Without going into excruciating detail, because I think people probably have some understanding of what the proposal is. I'll also stop there and see if Raul wants to add anything, including what he sees as problems in the proposal.
And so I hope you've had a chance to read through. I know it's multiple pages. This advisory committee, but I think it was important that they go in depth and explain exactly how it works. So I appreciate that they did. And Bernard, do you want to do just a quick brief? Oh, I can do it, and you tell me when I'm wrong. Okay. All right. Tell me when I'm wrong. What it proposes is a 5-person civilian board. These are all residents of Brookline. And there's some caveats here about the membership that they neither be a current employee of the town or an immediate family member of a current department, that is police department employee. And that the membership shall have racial and economic diversity, including perspectives of communities that have suffered from inequitable treatment by policing in America. And that there would be 5 of those members elected to staggered 3-year terms, as usual. And then that there would be a set of 5 other non-voting members, and they would be the Office of a representative of the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, the Human Resource Department, town council, and the police department. And I don't think we have any issues there at all. I think one of the places where we have an area of disagreement is that there shall, or it says there shall also be a non-voting representative of the police union, of the Brookline Police Union. I think that frankly unnecessarily politicizes this body. It's a police union is a lobbying group that actually makes donations to candidates that they want to support for various reasons, potentially candidates that later on are making appointments to this board. And so I'm a little concerned about having police union representative, even in a non-voting capacity on this board, whereas we already have a representative of the police department. Further, it just kind of opens the door for interest groups, like, you know, let's add a position for Brookline for racial justice and equity or some other interest group in Brookline. And I think it just unnecessarily politicizes and might hinder the work of the body. There are some other small points which I think at some point we should share the. We literally are working on this afternoon, folks. So, you know, apologies for not having shared this the updated version with you. But whether or not they would hold public hearings once or twice a year, I think twice a year is the better way to do it, because they're actually going to be reporting on the mid-year survey as well as the mid-year police report as well as the annual police report, and it makes sense to hold a public hearing for each. I would say the big issue here is around the continued inclusion in this process of the Office of Professional Responsibility at the police department. I understand that it's town council's belief that this is something, if we wanted to eliminate that department, that's something that she believes we would need to collectively bargain with the union to be able to do that. And that may be the case. I do think that the key issue that folks in the community have around, and by the way, complaints is one aspect of what this body would do. And what I most like about the proposal is that it's not just about police complaints. It's about overseeing and oversight of policies and involvement of the community in policy making and advising the board on select board policies. Excuse me. But the continued inclusion of the Office of Professional Responsibility is a major issue, and here's why. We are not one of those very large cities that has multiple precincts and then an internal affairs office somewhere off to the side, and you may never ever meet the person who's in that role until you end up having to go before internal affairs for some reason, like in the movies or on TV shows. This is one precinct. It's a small precinct relatively, where folks know each other, where folks are related to each other, have long-lasting friendships with some and not others. And it, you know, I've said this before, you put good people in a bad system, you get bad outcomes no matter how good the good people are. And this system right now, not just, you know, it's certainly, you know, for many folks and folks, you know, like me, frankly, a feeling that the outcomes of this process are not necessarily going to be 100% faithful. And that's a real issue. And bias exists everywhere. And what we should do is create policies to try to mitigate that bias as much as we possibly can, understanding that it's impossible to mitigate it altogether. Having this person, in one person, as far as I know, sort of write reports on all of these complaints and all these issues. You know, I've seen enough reports personally where, you know, I think most issues, someone's 80% right and someone else is 20% right? The person shouldn't have done that, but they did it because someone else did something else or whatever it is, right? The officer was rude to me, but, you know, I kind of gave him a little attitude to or something to that effect. Not always the case. Sometimes someone's 100% wrong. I continue to see reports where the report comes out that the person who made the complaint is 100% wrong, either they're crazy or they're making it up or something, and the police are 100% right. That to me doesn't pass the sniff test. It just doesn't. You know, we need more nuance as a board, and we're not getting it through this process. We haven't been getting it through this process. So that to me is a major sticking point. I think it's something that we need to address. If it needs to be that we pass this very good but not perfect document, and policy, because it's the best we can do right now, without bargaining for it, but bargaining for this important change, then maybe we need to do that. But I think I'd like to know whether or not the board, moving forward, wants to move in a direction where we remove complaints from the Office of Professional Responsibility altogether. That could be, doesn't mean hire a private investigator or something like that necessarily. That could be in the HR department, which, by the way, conducts, addresses complaints all the time from other departments. So there's some other small things that we can sort of go through maybe later or whenever everybody's had a chance to see the updated version. But those I think would be the two issues for me. One is the inclusion of a non-voting representative from the police union, and this issue with the Office of Professional Responsibility.
So actually, both of them really relate to the issue of we need to make sure that this process has credibility, not only in the community, but in the police department, because we need their cooperation if there's, with respect to complaints as well as other things. The inclusion of the police union head or someone as a non-voting member was designed to make sure that we get that point of view. It's different from from the point of view of the person that the police department would assign to represent the police department. That's going to be management. This is the officers on the beat whose views are going to be significantly different from the views of management. Now, Michael Zurob and I, discussed this with Raul earlier today. I think Michael's going to come up with some language that de-emphasizes being a member and just emphasizes the importance of a regular or ongoing consultation. I mean, I don't care. I just want to make sure that that this committee gets more than just management's point of view in dealing with issues that include both complaints as well as how the department should be run from the standpoint of policies and procedures. The other thing you mentioned, the IOA. My concern is that who's going to do it? Now you say HR could do it. I'm not sure that that's the case. So I mean, that would be something we'd have to really look at, and whether it really makes sense in terms of the peculiarities of police complaints and other things. Heather?
There was a warrant article, I forget which town meeting, but I think it was within the last 2 years, where I think we created a bylaw change where the Diversity Commission has investigatory powers now.
Right, and they're working on a complaint process. Now, not investigatory powers, but as I recall, and my recollection is not that great, it was they set up a complaint process. Well, Raul, you know about this because you're the liaison.
Yeah, I think it's quite controversial. It's got there are certain powers invested in there. And by the way, they're still working on it, so we don't exactly know what the final version is going to be, and how I think they're trying to make it as faithful to the warrant article. I don't know if it was a resolution or warrant article, but that passed in town meeting as possible, and that's caused them some delays.
My recollection is that town meeting went against our recommendation. I think we had our own competing version, but town meeting actually passed the warrant article as it was originally submitted by the petitioner, Arthur Conquest. And I remember investigatory powers being included in that version. And there was talk about having to have all of the members on the commission resign and recruit people with certain expertise that could be able to do those types of investigations. So I'd be very interested to hear from the commission where that stands and whether or not my recollection is closer to what happened.
If I could add just a couple of clarifications. Heather is right that that is what, excuse me, that was what was written into the warrant article as presented to town meeting. And Raul is right that it presented complications, and Bernard is right, it presented complications. And the end result was, yes, we adopted the article, but with a effective date of, I believe it was June 30th or July 1st of this year, 2021. And the warrant article that we are going to face in May calls for that effective date to be pushed back until 2022. So we are still under the bylaw that pre-existed, which specifically did not allow for CDICR to do investigations, and specifically kept the process of investigating complaints against the police within the hands of the select board, who are, you know, for people who think we don't have a citizen review board of the police, we actually do. You can argue whether it's effective or not, but you know, that is currently assigned to the select board in their role as police commissioners. And they are there to, and I'm not explaining this to Heather because she knows this already, but to the public, they are there to be the court of last resort for people who do not get satisfaction when their complaints against the police are investigated by the police. Am I stating it correctly? I hope I am.
I think you got it
that's
right, John. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing is that the DICR group would have investigatory powers, which, you know, is no big deal, but not, unless I'm misremembering this, not subpoena power. So, you know, they couldn't subpoena an officer and compel him to come before them to answer questions. We can do that.
Really? That's the first I'm hearing about it.
Well, yeah, that's one of the great powers we have as a select board.
Why don't we use that more?
For what?
Who do you want to
Who do you want to subpoena?
I mean, 4 years I've been on this board, I've never issued a subpoena.
Let's see.
It's very rarely used wherever it exists.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of whether we had occasion to do it. I mean, we've hired independent investigators, and for the most part, people were cooperative. They came before, or actually, you know, number of cases, not a number, but a few cases, the complainants just refused to cooperate, and there's no reason for us to force them to. So,
I think also
those cases
when,
went away.
I don't know how we reconcile it because it was a warrant article, but when that warrant article passed, this was not what we're discussing tonight, was not a glimmer in anyone's eye.
Right.
And so, you know, what we have now is, and the document in one of the footnotes, like addresses, like mentions this, and I agree with that footnote, which is that we have a sort of folks can file a complaint with the police department, potentially with this new body. They can file a complaint with HR, and potentially the CDICR, and then, you know, folks can also give us a call, and then we've got to figure out exactly how to route that or handle that issue when folks call us with a complaint too, which, you know, folks frequently do. So there's a lot of different ways to make complaints, and I'm not sure that's necessarily, you know, making sure that all those complaints are addressed equitably is a concern when you have that many different ways for complaints to be filed.
Well, a lot of that is supposed to be handled by a liaison position in the diversity office that would, you know, have authority to assist complainants and, you know, basically shepherd complaints, you know, through the process, whether it's, you know, initially filed with the police department, the select board, the diversity office, or with the committee itself. So, you know, that's, you know, one new position we're talking about. And it's probably not a full-time position. And I'm sure that Lloyd has plenty, or Dr. Jalno has plenty other things that a position like this could do, because town meeting puts stuff on his plate every year. And I just wonder how he's able to do all that we're asking him to do, but he does it. No.
the conundrum in all of this is that, in fact, as currently in place, the number of complaints against the police in Brookline is quite low. I think I heard cited maybe 8 within the most recent year. And as the Reform Committee heard testimony from Howard Friedman, attorney who represents people in their complaints against the police, his view of things was that Brookline is notable for the low level of complaints in terms of their number, but also in terms of their, what's the word? In terms
Severity.
of the severity. Thank you very much. And as he pointed out, they tend to be complaints about rudeness by officers. Now, that's one way of looking at it. Okay, so we have a low number, and they tend to be not very severe stuff. On the other hand, as critics have rightly pointed out, when the record is that complaints almost never get upheld by the police when they do their internal investigations, that in and of itself could have been a factor in suppressing the complaints from coming forward. People sort of come to sort of think the police are just going to say there's nothing to this, so why bother? So I think we need to figure out, do we have a low net level of complaints because we just have a really, really good police department, or is it in part because we also have a record of almost never finding in favor of the complainant?
Yeah.
And is this new proposal a better way of both getting people to trust that their complaints will be dealt with correctly, and also that there will be action taken when they make a complaint?
Yeah, let me just say that we sustain more complaints than the national and state average, and more than our surrounding communities. That was one. Now it's like, I think something like 12%. I don't know exactly, but around there. And so your point still is a valid point that we may sustain, let's say it's 12%, but the perception of people may be that we sustain 0%. And the reason for that perception is a number of things. But the committee would also deal with issues such as things that people may not want to make complaints because it's just a hassle. I mean, people have a lot lives to live, and you get discourteous behavior by police, as well as by people in supermarkets or banks. And sometimes the hassle of making a complaint makes it not worth it. So hopefully we'll be able to, through this committee, make it a little easier so that we get more complaints. And we've already established this civilian feedback form that is designed to make it super easy for someone who has an encounter or an interaction with a police officer that they either think was great or think was bad, to very easily, using their cell phone even, give their input to the town, so that we at least know about it and can monitor and evaluate trends.
I think that, like I said, there's a lot of good in here. I think that that what John brings up is important to consider, and I don't think necessarily more complaints is something that's going to make us, maybe it'll make us look bad, but I think it'll produce a better department in the long run. And so the more we can hear from people, because I have the same concerns, and I've talked about a very serious incident where where I didn't complain, where I didn't file a complaint, and it was very serious. I think abuse of force, not here in Brookline, I'll make that clear. But there's all kinds of reasons why folks don't. The other concern, of course, is, and this goes straight through the sort of the OPR process, I think, is that the first draft of all of this is written by the officer, right? And so, said, like, show me a police report where an officer says, I made a mistake, or I was discourteous, or I didn't follow procedure, I will wait. I'll give you all day. I'll give you tomorrow. I'll give you the next week. You're not gonna be able to find.
I'll give you one right now. Raj, the Honda's complaint. There
And
was
so,
this-
in the original police report,
And yes,
yeah, it said what? Oh, I don't want to bring up
Yeah,
Roger's
yeah,
situation right now.
yeah.
Sorry, Bernard, you know my point stands. That these reports aren't written to talk about what the officer did. They're written to talk about what the subject did, what the person that they stopped did. That's how they're written. And if they are talking about the officer's behavior, if you can find one exception, okay. They are written to talk about how they followed their training and did what they were supposed to do.
I don't think
And
that's-
this puts, okay, we can do a systematic review of police reports.
Okay,
Um,
I
or-
have them
or-
all on my computer. I'm gonna
Yeah.
look at them.
Yeah. And
Please do that outside of this meeting right now.
Right now. But the larger point is that this puts people at a particular disadvantage if they want to make a complaint, and then their complaint is handled by the same department that they have a complaint on. And so this continues to be, I think, a serious flaw in even this very good revised and new body and policy. And I understand there may be no immediate way around it because of the need to bargain this, if in fact we do need to bargain this. But I think when we pass this and it is what it is, and we don't even make an attempt to remove the investigation out from the police department, I don't think we're going to see a significant change. I don't think people are all of a sudden going to feel, maybe they feel like they've got a better shot, but not a fair shot necessarily. I wouldn't feel that way, frankly, myself, if I had a complaint to file.
And by the way, people, you probably know, the new police reform law, has this police officers standards and training body that is set up to deal with really egregious complaints. So we're going to end up, just like every other municipality, only dealing with things like discourtesy or maybe worse behavior than that. But the really egregious stuff is going to be taken over by the post commission, which can decertify an officer and prevent him from working anywhere, at least in the state. So,
yeah.
Nancy, you're muted.
I want you to share in my dog's whimperings here. I haven't had a chance to figure out or think about how, but I think that part of this process should be how we're going to, maybe Mr. Plecker can weigh in on this too, how we're going to implement that police reform bill from the state. And what do we need to do to make sure that our policies and procedures are in line with that bill?
Yeah, what the police department is working on that. At least I've been told that, but they have to do a lot to get their policies in line with the provisions in the bill, and that they will have to present those to the select board to both read and understand, but then vote yes or no. So we're going to have a role in that. Hopefully people will have the time and the inclination to really look at what comes to us so that we both understand and can really support any changes that are made. So I'm trying to think of how do we go forward from here. There are a number of other things. I mean, I circulated what I call an organizational chart to sort of illustrate what our committee has come up with as, sorry, Raul, but an alternative to Brookline Forward, in the sense that the things that we think need to be done could be done through our existing Department of Health and Human Services, as well as other departments. And it just involves, the hiring of just a few people, social workers, as well as, the diversity liaison in the diversity office, to, take some of the burden off of police in areas where it's really appropriate that police not, be required to handle, for example, a lot, but not all homeless issues. And, we're proposing a position in the health department that would work with the police so that where there are situations involving homeless people that don't require police involvement, for example, where it's not a trespass issue or an issue of hot dispute between a homeowner and a person who may have an encampment somewhere, et cetera. We can have non-police involvement. Similarly with the mental health and substance abuse or substance use, as the DSM puts it, cases where there are situations where you don't need police, and currently we have an emergency services, what's it called, ESP, Emergency Services Program here in Brookline, which is a state requirement called the BEST, which is Boston Emergency Services Team, that currently provides a lot of support for the Brookline Police, and sometimes is able to supplant the police getting involved in a crisis situation that's not really very dangerous. So we have a number of other proposals, such as one of the comparing the Brookline current situation to, for example, the Hoots program. The one thing where we do have a lack, and that is aftercare. And that includes a situation where someone is in such a severe crisis that they need to have some place to sleep, basically, or be, while their issues are worked through. Now, currently, they end up in the emergency room, which is both very expensive as well as not very good for anyone facing any type of crisis. So, that I think that the chart I gave you gives you a sense of, what we're proposing as an alternative to the use bringing in the Cahoots program, which I think would be pretty expensive and would have to get licensed through the state to be a emergency service provider.
May I ask a question of both the chairs
Yeah.
of the groups? Do either of your proposals contemplate reduction in FTEs in the police department?
Ours does not. We propose an increase in a social worker that doesn't necessarily have to be placed in the police department. There's no reason why it couldn't be placed in the health department, but we also are proposing an increase in data entry or data analysis person. That may not be necessary if existing personnel could be used to do what we're suggesting, that is make the data reports that are prepared by the department useful for not just policing, but useful for analysis by the PCAC and other customers. So.
And the reimagining task force?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty clear in our proposal that we certainly do. That would be through the elimination of the SRO and walk and talk units.
But would that result in a reduction in actual police officers?
Well, that really depends, doesn't it? I know that there are a number of vacancies right now, and there's a lot that needs to get figured out there, certainly. But you know,
Well, you know, as I say, I mean, the question is the full-time equivalency positions. Because I'm just trying to get a handle on, if we're adding full-time equivalency positions, that's going to cost us money. If we are subtracting full-time equivalency positions, that might save us some money. So
Yeah.
would the reimagining task force reduce the number of full-time equivalency positions in the police department?
well, what it would do is actually, so there are 7, 3 walk and talk and 4 school resource officers right now. And the amount that we're recommending to fund the new positions in this department that we contemplate would be just over $500,000. And either Mel, or I don't see Melissa, but Mel or someone else might be able to give us the number of the amount of those 7 FTEs that are in the police department right now. And I understand, and also there's other costs as well associated with, beyond payment, beyond salary, is Quinn and other things that are folded into police officer positions that aren't necessarily folded into other positions too.
Yeah, but any loss in officers would be the junior officers who don't have the type of Quinn benefits that the more senior officers have. And those junior officers, don't have the aren't paid as much as the senior officers that you're eliminating from the walk and talk and the SRO programs.
Well, it really depends. It's impossible to know without the involvement of the town administrator, deputy town administrator, and the police chief. If they'd like to come up with a proposal to let us know exactly what that would look like, then that would, I think, be helpful for everybody.
Yeah, I don't think that the union contract require, I assume, because most union contracts do, that if there's a reduction in force, it's going to be the most junior officers who have a significant lower pay than senior officers. Even though many of them, I assume, I don't really know, but I assume, do detail work, which is not paid for by Brookline anyway.
So I asked the question because I'm sorry, Heather, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it would be interesting to get the current vacancy numbers and what the rule would actually be if we were to ever reduce.
Can I just add a couple of quick things before I forget them? One, I think we absolutely agree that more data collection, analysis, and transparency needs to happen in the police department. It was one of the areas that we were the most concerned. The idea that not every interaction is captured. I don't mean just saying hello to somebody, not that kind of interaction, but actual stops. Not all of them are captured. Was really concerning. That there is the use of data in retraining does not seem particularly robust. And again, just making even more data than exists in the police reports transparent for external analysis, I think would be really helpful. Obviously, de-identified data, of course. So that's one piece. The other piece on the cahoots, I hope you'll note that we very carefully crafted our recommendation to consult with the cahoots program. We know there's a great deal of work that needs to get figured out and how something like that might integrate with our existing services, where there's overlap, and where this new unit might actually yield some benefits beyond obviously the services, but benefits budget wise or in other ways as well. So that's what we've, and our understanding is that we can engage in that consultancy for about $20,000 for, if I'd have to look back at the report, but somewhere around like 9 months or something like that, for some significant amount of time, to be able to sort of work with them, put together a team to figure out if there's a viable path forward with this model. So we certainly aren't recommending that we start doing that, stop doing something else immediately. And that's why we need to figure out exactly also what it would cost us.
I wanted to, if there's still time, On the subject of data, I want to second what my colleague, Mr. Fernandez, has said. And I want to take it to a next step, and this is where I cued Devin to help me with a pie chart that I prepared. Because this is data that, and I do commend the task force for doing a survey that was extensive and that gathered a lot of data. And I know that there was a particular question in the survey that I took issue with, but putting that aside, there's a lot of data in the survey, some of which isn't actually made explicit in the task force report. And this is just one example, because you can sort of do a more of a dive into the raw data and then determine, for example, what do people in the age range of 70 plus think about Brookline's policing? And you can come up with the actual numbers from the survey. And for those who are taking a first look at this, which would be everybody but me, so what you end up with is, as it says in the headline, that senior citizens, those 70 years and older, 82%. Very or somewhat satisfied with police. And that's represented by the orange, which is very satisfied, 57%. Green, somewhat satisfied, 25%. The yellow, which is the next largest pie slice, is not dissatisfaction. It's just neither satisfied or dissatisfied. And then you come to the section of the pie where you find the people who are dissatisfied to one extent or another, either very or somewhat. And that's a grand total of 4.1%, among these 70 years and older seniors. And I think that data is interesting. I don't think it commands, any particular response. If I think it through, maybe I could come up with some suggestions, but I think we should use data more, is my point, because data like this is helpful. Everybody likes to talk about, and we should talk about the sense of security that senior citizens get from public safety as it currently exists in Brookline, and this quantifies it. And if we can quantify it, I think we should quantify it. And so more data like this and more of it that is kind of, I hope, clearly represented, such as this is, can help us make some decisions about public safety going forward. And that's why I put this particular pie chart together.
Okay. Have we discussed this out?
I'll send it to you guys.
I would just say, Bernard, I'm not sure when you mentioned circulating, that was the other thing. You mentioned circulate. Did you circulate that recently, or is that part of the?
Yeah, just before this meeting.
Oh, I don't think, maybe I wasn't on that, because I don't think.
No, Devin, did you send it to everyone? It's in OneDrive. Okay.
It's in the OneDrive. Got it.
I'm sorry. I thought it
Okay.
was sent around.
I have to admit, I haven't seen it either, but
Okay, all right.
I will take it.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, I can understand. I wouldn't have found it in OneDrive either.
Okay.
But anyway, take a look at it.
We'll do. Yeah, I think we obviously need to know more, but there are some areas where I definitely think we can and should be investing more, and you see those areas really outlined in the Brookline Forward proposal. There's an opportunity here that I hope we won't miss. Regardless of what you think about other aspects of the proposal, of the report and our recommendations, there's a real opportunity here for us to have to invest more in again, not just addressing the social the sort of symptoms of some of these inequities that exist in our town, but investing in actually solving them. We're doing that in some ways. We're doing that certainly through helping build up the safety net fund. We're doing that by creating the racial equity advancement fund. And I know we're doing that in other ways. But there is a greater need for coordination and engagement by us as a town, as a government, and to have more people operating in that space, I think is going to lead to better outcomes for those folks. And I think we can do it. I think we've shown that we can do it for an investment of $500,000 of our budget. If you don't think that should come from the police department, maybe we can find some other place to have it come from. But I think we'll still continue to have, and the school committee and BHA will have a lot to say about those two units and what they'd like to do there. But I'd encourage us to think even more deeply about whether or not you feel we can make investments in the way that we outline them in the Brookline Forward proposal. And I'll take a look at what you put together and see where there's some areas of overlap.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I just had one question. Raul, in your organization chart, you have a commissioner and then you have the different departments. And now you agreed that, we could remove, you would remove from the proposal, seniors and veterans. And so then I'm wondering, well, wait a minute. Do we really need a commissioner and that kind of administrative expense over the remaining services? If they could fit into the various models we already have, wouldn't that reduce the need for $539,000, because a commissioner and administrative assistant, et cetera, is going to be, at least 150,000 of that. So I think there's a lot more thought that needs to go into this, and we'll keep working at it, and I think we can come to some meeting of the minds here. But I do think that is an important way we can say, okay, maybe we don't need this level of administration.
Yeah, I think I'm less concerned with or maybe I think less of that role as an administrative role in the way that other people do. And I think more of that role as a cabinet level thought leader on social services, which we have some really great people in our cabinet currently that are addressing those issues. And one of them is Dr. Jett, to the best he can, while also managing a lot else that's going on right now. But to have someone lead and orient us in that way in our cabinet, I think is really important. So I know other folks have sort of got, well, this is just bureaucracy, and I don't think of it as bureaucracy at all. I think of it as leadership and someone that's going to help us lead. So that's sort of my thinking. Commissioner, director, cabinet level position is what I'm looking for. But I agree with your sort of overall assessment, Nancy, that there may be some way to there's different permutations of this, and we can try to find something that works for everybody.
And to some degree, Dr. Jelena was thought of as serving that role. A little different, but I get what you're saying. Okay. Anything else? Why don't we end now? And I thought it was a good discussion. Raul and I are going to have to figure out a way of presenting this so that we can vote on those things we need to vote on. Maybe in a graphic way, so that it's easier to understand. Because both of these reports are pretty complicated. Let's put it that way. And there's a lot there, and a lot of things, a lot of moving parts. So
I'd say at some point we should just let the public know where they can see these documents, and invite them to give us some feedback too. Obviously, before we make any
more feedback.
Yeah, even more feedback. Yeah, but I think they haven't really focused in. I mean, you see, we've now had a presentation, we had a public hearing, and other discussions, and I think overwhelmingly the feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, was focused on the task force report, and we really haven't dug in, or the public hasn't really dug in on the oversight body. And I think it's really important that they do. And like I said, we're in, we reached a lot of points of agreement today. So I'm just curious to hear. I'm in a position where as one of the folks, and I think I'm almost put in a position of being, if even more critical. If there was someone on the board to the left of me, then maybe I could sit back in my seat a little bit more and let them sort of address some of these issues, and I get to be perceived on the board as a bit more moderate. But as someone who's sort of carrying someone on the board who's sort of carrying the weight of a lot of people who want to see meaningful change here, I find myself in the position where I've got to do my best, my level best, to make sure that that I'm bringing all these issues. And it doesn't always sound nice, and I know I don't always sound as polite as folks would like me to be, or say enough that that there are good officers, or that we have a better than most department, and those kinds. I get it. I get that people, I think I'll just continue to be criticized for that, and that's okay. But I hope you all see that I'm trying to serve an important role here, which is to make sure that all those voices of people who are very concerned, who want even more meaningful or radical or whatever it is change than we're talking about today, that they feel like they have a voice in this dialogue, even when outside of their own ability to give public comment and send us emails. So I'm trying my level best to do that. It's not always the easiest position to be in on the board, and but I'll keep doing it. I'll and try to find a way forward that that brings us to a place where people feel like this sort of 6 months in ongoing process or ride or journey that we've been on is leading to the kinds of reform or reimagining that many people are hoping for.
Okay. Let me just say that I don't think anyone thinks you're discourteous, or however you characterized it. So, and the other thing is, I don't think that this board sort of lays out in a left-right fashion as the French Assembly back in the 1700s laid out, where we got this left-right dichotomy nonsense. We're here trying to run a town in the best way possible, and while we're all political, at a certain point, the politics have to give way to what works here in this town, and I think we're all committed to that. So okay, unless there's anything else, I'd like to end this meeting. Okay, this special meeting. Oh, Heather.
I'll just thank you both for all of the work that you put in, all the hours, all of the grief that I'm sure you have both been on the receiving end of. And thank you for working together to bring to this board something that you both could find common ground on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Got it.
And
Absolutely.
grief makes you stronger, I guess. I'd like to believe that anyway. Okay, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.